when you look at the implications of fatty liver. And when I was talking about the carnivore diet and visceral fat, you can assume that if you've got a thick belly, okay, whether you're obese or whether you fall into that, what's called skinny fat, where you kind of don't have a lot of lean muscle, but you get that paunch that's pretty significant, you're probably going to have fatty liver. So that's a big consideration, and that is going to be correlated to those high triglycerides. So I think you summed it up pretty well there. I mean, my triglycerides went from 100, which still is not, I really, I thought it was going to be a lot worse. I really did. I was kind
Pretty
of
good.
happy with that. I was kind of happy with that number, but it went down to 84,
Yeah.
so which is no surprise. Again, when you look at all the people that are lining up with the benefits results from the carnivore diet, if they are looking at blood work, these are not surprising numbers at all.
No, not at all. And we see that, again, quote unquote, bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol went up 136. So already kind of borderline high to 155, which is definitely high. Most doctors would be stunned and they would want you on a statin. Does that high LDL cholesterol concern you at all?
No, not at all. In fact, where I'm at, I do think sometime eventually, if you look at my ratios to answer your question, and I have a good balance between HDL, LDL, and triglycerides, and where the LDL, at least through the historic eyes of evaluating LDL, went from 136 to 155, as you said. But I look at that as a sign of vitality.
Agreed.
Okay, and when you look at and again, your sarcasm in terms of talking about good and bad cholesterol, HDL and LDL. Look, cholesterol is essential. Like, it's vital. Like, you die without it, right? Now, it is the ratio, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's involved in hormone production and LDL. There's a lot of information starting to maybe surface a little bit more too and support, because it has a lot to do with supporting our body's response to inflammation. And I
Absolutely.
touch on that. Don't ask me a lot of questions about it. I haven't researched that. I haven't personally studied that aspect, but I have seen enough study headlines to know that I think there are implications around that. So I am totally cool with my ratios and where my LDL cholesterol's at, especially with my history of autoimmune issues. And I
Yeah.
think that there's starting to be some information and studies starting to come out in terms of people with low LDL are not doing that well in terms of
Yeah.
longevity and inflammation. So
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's some really cool research out with people that have familial hypercholesterolemia, which means they're born with a genetic disease where their cholesterol is really, really high. And up until they've got a higher mortality rate until they turn about 40, and then they
yeah,
reach a crossover point. So if you have this condition, a really unfortunate condition, kids die of heart attacks at like age 6. It's really tragic. But again, if you
yeah,
make it to a certain disease, they actually survive much better than the general population, and they're like disproportionately protected from other diseases that people die from, like cancer, hypertension, dementia. And so it's interesting that genetic condition in the beginning of your life isn't great, but if you survive past a certain point, you're even more protected. And I think there's great evidence that LDL cholesterol in particular is really good for things like immunity. You mentioned inflammation. I would be really happy with that number. You already mentioned the fatty liver, so we see the ALT number. So that went from 35 to 26, which is right in range. That's phenomenal.
yeah, totally
I
cool with that. Yep, yep,
Yeah, very much agree with what we've talked about already with visceral fat. If you are storing fat inside the middle part of the body, if you have hard fat, not the jiggly fat, but the hard, firm fat in and around
yes.
your belly, that is your body depositing fat where it really shouldn't go, and you would really rather not have that happen.
That's a great description, Casey. Seriously, the way how simply you broke that down to everybody can relate to that. So agree.
Yeah, we go to your body metrics, and the first one we come up to is waist to height ratio and your waist. Here we go. If you can't do any of this, if you are, so poor that you've got none of this, that's my next most important thing is, what is your waist circumference? Go grab a piece of string, measure your waist circumference. That again is another proxy that tells me whether you're metabolically healthy or not, and we can make inferences about where we think the other numbers might be. But let's talk about waist to height, your waist, and your overall weight.
Yeah, so the my waist height ratio went from 0.58, which is high. So optimally, maybe 0.43 to 0.52, and a drop to 0.52. And yeah, we're going to talk about my waist, and let's just jump right in because, and this really was less than the 4 months. Again, I went into this assessment in really 90 days, but my waist went from 41 to 36, and it's actually less than that now. Think about it in that short sort of time frame. And I'm not watching. Again, calories are just also a silly thing to do, but for most people, vast majority of people. But I'm eating. I'm full. I'm satiated. I feel nourished. But again, when you look at that waist reduction in terms of inches, 41 to 36, to be honest with you, my waist and my weight from an anesthetic perspective had more impact to me personally, psychologically, than I would care to admit. And I would just use the word pride, and I've never, again, looking at things, but when it impacted me personally, it just feels really friggin' good. And then when you think about the health implications, because and we'll get into my weight, but that's visceral fat, and let's just jump down to my weight because we don't need to talk about my height, which you mentioned, because that's remains static. No surprise there.
Shocker.
My That's so funny. I went from 211 pounds to 181. I think I'm like 178, 179. I really have, I don't really weigh, but let's just say 30 pounds. And if you want to just take 4 months, again, satiated, full, nourished, not craving, and then you get that kind of response, right? So, I mean, it's just friggin' off the chart. I mean, those results, those things just absolutely. I'll speak from a client, a personal perspective, not a health practitioner. Absolutely blew me away.
Yeah.
Blew me away.
Yeah.
And the fact that I can stay satiated. And the big thing is, I won't talk about this too much because I do resistance training. I don't do it crazily. I know what I'm doing, so I can really dial it in. I mean, my resistance training is like 20 minutes. But the thing about this is, so I'm 65, okay, and I have, because of years of accumulated, maybe doing resistance training, and not off the chart, right? I mean, I went through the bro days early on of some semi bodybuilding and carb loading and all that. That was a long time ago. But the big thing I want to emphasize here is I have not lost any lean muscle. Okay. And I, for a lot of listeners that are following people on, out there in the space, but I want to emphasize that because that is huge. And especially when I see, we don't have to get into the emphasis more to, plant-based diets, that aren't going to have enough protein, amino acids to help build that lean muscle. But to maintain your lean muscle at 60, like look, when you start to get over 50, man, the last thing you want to do is lose lean muscle.
Right.
And not only just in terms of, I'm talking about aesthetics, I'm talking about health. And also when you look at insulin and you look at lean muscle and implications for being supportive of healthy glucose levels, it's a big deal. So again, I didn't lose any lean muscle.
Yeah.
In fact, I have gained.
Yeah.
I haven't measured it. I'm not measuring and doing all that stuff, but I could just tell, you look in the mirror, and I'm not looking in the mirror and flexing or anything like that, but just, getting out of the shower, glancing, kind of a thing. I have maintained lean muscle.
Yeah. Okay, so you and I share many of the same kind of certifications. We've gone through some of the same things. These are nationally accredited, very well respected, with lots of different education and manuals. And according to them, Impossible. What you did is impossible. You cannot do that. You can't lose the maximum recommended amount of weight to lose in 1 week, which you lost at the rate of about 2 pounds per week. You would lose fat, but you would also lose lean mass. You'd lose muscle tissue. You'd lose water. It's impossible. You can't do that. And why is it that I see it all the time? You can absolutely maintain and grow muscle and lose fat at really high rates and keep that up for a long time. It's
So
amazing.
a bit of yeah, so a bit of sarcasm. So yeah, I weigh my food, before every meal, and I'm making sure I'm at about 1,200 calories.
Yeah, exactly. Healthy
Not,
snacks.
not. So yeah, so the point about that is that you're absolutely right, and it's phenomenal, and again, I'm not counting calories. I mean, if I'm hungry, I'm going to eat more. I mean, tomorrow night's Friday. I usually celebrate with a pound and a half grass-fed ribeye, and that's going to happen. Yeah, it's not. We're not watching calories. You're just friggin' nourishing your body. You
Yeah,
know.
totally different paradigm. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely a different paradigm. Yeah.
That's amazing.